Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Eric Dubay. Eric is one of the leading voices behind the revival of the Flat Earth theory. He currently lives in Thailand, where he teaches yoga and Wing Chun, which is the traditional Chinese martial art of self-defense. Eric has also written a number of books, one of which is The Flat Earth Conspiracy, where Eric explains how the world has been systematically brainwashed and indoctrinated for centuries into believing the greatest lie of all time, that the Earth is a spinning globe. Our discussion was wide-ranging as we talked through many of the proof points supporting the Flat Earth model, as well as addressing some of the arguments used by the heliocentrists, or the globe believers, in their attempts to debunk the Flat Earth theory. I strongly urge everyone to listen with an open and critical mind. I believe you'll find the topic extremely interesting and not as cut and dry as you might think. And to kick things off, I asked Eric about his journey in life, and here is what he had to say.
Well, I was born in Maine, and I went to school for philosophy and English, and because of a friend of mine who was a Thai guy that moved there, I got interested in Thailand and came and visited Thailand and got the idea that I would teach English in Thailand after I finished college, and that's what I did. A couple months after I got my degree, I came over here, and I've been here ever since. Taught English for about 7 years, and then transitioned into doing what I'd been wanting to do more so, which is be a writer as well as do martial arts and yoga. I'd been teaching Taekwondo back in the States, and then I started teaching Wing Chun and yoga here in Bangkok. And now I'm written 4 books and trying to spread the word about the Flat Earth.
You're doing a very good job.
Thanks, man.
Let me ask you, Eric, when did you get started with your Flat Earth discussions? When did you do that in earnest?
Everything kind of hit the internet around November 2014. That's when I exploded all the information on. But for the past few years before that, I'd been researching it myself. And when I figured out that this was for real, and I wanted to expose it, as I'd been doing with many other things on my blog, The Atlantean Conspiracy, I knew that this was a big one, and it was open to all kinds of ridicule, and there's so many unanswered questions, and I thought, I'm not even going to talk about this or write about this publicly until I've got it completely under wraps myself. So I spent a good many months and years, really, getting it under wraps myself. And then, November 2014 is when I published my book. I came out with a kind of a documentary, The Flat Earth Conspiracy, and I've been putting out articles. I started the International Flat Earth Research Society, and doing interviews and whatever I can to try and spread the word since then.
Well, I can tell you, I bought your book, and I started reading it about, I guess, maybe 40 to 50 pages in. It's excellent.
Thanks.
It really is. It's well written. It's articulate. It's an enjoyable read. So I'm going to say to the audience, go to Eric's site, Atlantean Conspiracy, and you can download the book as a PDF. And what I do is I send it off to Staples so they can print it. It's about 200 somewhat pages, but so far it's an excellent read.
Cool. Glad you're liking it.
Yeah, I love it. Now, the Flat Earth theory, Eric, in big part because of your efforts and the way you're able to articulate the message and get the points across, seems to be getting a lot of traction based on YouTube, blogs, and websites. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing that it's starting to pick up a head of steam?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing this for 8 or 9 years now with Atlantean Conspiracy, writing conspiracy books and blogs and articles and on forums and YouTube and everything. But my personal presence and fame or whatnot has totally exploded since I put out the Flat Earth stuff. And it's just, a fruit that's ripe, an idea it's like a balloon that's been pushed underwater or something. Once you let go, it just comes rising to the surface really fast. I feel like that's what's happened with the Flat Earth. It's something that's been completely ridiculed and pushed aside for so long. My book was the first pro-Flat Earth book written in almost 50 years, so nobody's even really considered the subject for so long that now that it's out there again, it's just really picking up speed fast.
It is. I was listening to a Richie Allen show, and he had Zen Gardner on, and I know Zen. Somebody had tweeted into Richie, hey, ask Zen does he know anything about the Flat Earth theory? And he was totally on board. He said he and his wife are on board. And Zen had asked Richie to get in touch with you, so you might be getting a call to come on the Richie Allen show.
Okay.
All right, just a heads up. Now, Eric, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, before we get into this, as I had mentioned, I had gotten into it about 2 months ago or so, and I had the same reaction, I guess, it's just about everybody. When I first saw the videos, I thought to myself, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Something just nudged me to watch the videos and say, look, just take a look at it. And then once I started watching them, I got hooked, to be quite honest, because it was becoming more and more difficult to debunk what was being presented by people like yourself, people who are bringing legitimate evidence and facts and observations forward. And that's what I mean by that, because there's a lot of people doing these videos these days, but in my mind, there's a select few that are doing the type of work that you're doing. And I think that you're leading the pack, quite honestly. But my question would be, for somebody who thinks that right now the conversation that you and I are having is absolutely bizarre, what are some of the basic observations someone can make to ascertain that the Earth is neither a globe or spinning, just to kind of whet their appetite?
And everybody, I think, comes to it pretty much the same way. We've been taught that we're on a ball spinning around the sun. And so to hear that you might be on a flat plane, motionless at the center of the universe with all the celestial bodies spinning around you, just as it appears, actually comes as a surprise. But it shouldn't, because our eyes, experience, and common sense all tell us that the horizon is perfectly flat, and we feel motionless. We don't hear ourselves whizzing by at thousands of miles per hour. The stars remain in their positions day after day, year after year, millennia after millennia. They're fixed in their constellations, so it sure doesn't seem that they're at various distances, trillions of miles away from us. Otherwise, we'd see these things. So there's a lot of practical, experiential proofs. Just your everyday experience, like I'm saying, actually is from a flat Earth perspective. The fact that we would see this as crazy or ridiculous is actually just because we've been taught a system that's very contrary, and we've also kind of been taught to ridicule this idea of a flat earther. So we kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to the subject, and like you said, myself and everybody comes to the flat earth thinking like, what is this? I'll just click on this for a laugh. Let's see what these idiots are talking about. And eventually you see that, well, these guys seem to know more than I thought they would. And then the NASA and the other supposedly credible sources start to look more and more laughable as time goes on. And yeah, so anyway, you were asking for some kind of proofs that we can test for ourselves, and one of the most obvious is the horizon, which you see as always flat, and it rises to your level as you go up in altitude. So if you're going up in a hot air balloon, if you're on a ball Earth, doesn't matter how big the ball is, the horizon would stay where it was, and as you rose up, you would have to tilt your head down and look over to see the horizon as it got lower and lower as you got higher and higher. That's just a reality of living on a curved surface. No matter how big the ball Earth is, that's how it would happen. And that doesn't happen. No matter how high amateur rockets or balloons have gone up, the horizon rises to the eye of the observer all the way up. And that's only consistent with a flat plane. And you can see below you, not spinning either. The clouds are just lazily moving one way or the other. It doesn't look at all or feel that there's a 1,000-mile-per-hour spin happening in any of these amateur balloon footage. In NASA footage, however, which looks suspiciously like computer-generated images a lot of the time, you can see a turning ball. So you'll notice that the clouds are often not morphing, and they're staying exactly in the same patterns for 24 plus hours at a time. So there's some anomalies in the supposed images and videos of the spinning ball Earth that we've been shown by NASA and other space organizations, and they're contrary to what we see with our own eyes and in amateur rockets and balloon footage, where the horizon is completely flat and rises all the way up as high as we're able to go.
Now, Eric, you talked about the Earth spinning 1,000 miles an hour. So one of the things that I'm bumping up against when you try to have conversations with folks is they are completely unaware of the speeds and the motion and so on. So could you maybe cover that a little bit? The Earth's spin at 1,000 miles an hour, flying around the sun at like 67,000 miles per hour. Could you cover that a little bit so they get an understanding of when we talk about spinning and rotation, what we're talking about?
Yeah. So their theory just gets more and more wild as time has gone on. And so, yeah, it began with the spinning Earth going 1,000 miles per hour, which is then circling around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour, which then they decided the sun wasn't a heliocentric model, but more of an acentric model, where they don't know where the center is, and we're just exploding out of a big bang. So the sun, we're spinning around the sun, and then the sun and us are spinning around the Milky Way galaxy, they say, at 500,000 miles per hour. And then the entire Milky Way galaxy, they say, is shooting off from the Big Bang at 670 million miles per hour, almost the speed of light. So there's at least four rip-raging, contradictory motions supposedly going at all times, yet you don't experience any of it, nor can you measure any of it using the stars.
Now, you mentioned not being able to measure it, so I have two questions, and I'll ask the first one about the flat Earth itself and whether there has been any scientific experiments done to prove or validate that the Earth is not a globe or that the Earth is not spinning.
Oh, sure. In the 1800s, there was a book written called 100 Proofs the Earth is Not a Globe by William Carpenter. In my book, I have over 200 proofs the Earth is not a globe. And yeah, there's been scientific experiments like the Michelson-Morley, Michelson-Gale, Airy's failure, and Sagnac experiments, which all proved that the Earth is motionless and everything in the sky revolves around us just as it appears. For instance, Airy's failure was this experiment where he took a telescope and measured the angle at which the starlight entered the telescope, and then filled the telescope up with water, which would slow down the speed of the light entering the telescope. So you'd be able to determine, based on that, whether it was the telescope and the Earth which are moving, or is it the stars over our head which are moving over a stationary Earth. And it's called Airy's failure because he was a heliocentrist, thinking he was about to prove the heliocentric theory of the ball Earth spinning around the sun, but instead he proved the opposite, that the geocentric theory, that the Earth is stationary. And the Michelson-Morley, Gale, and Sagnac experiments are all very similar, where they take light and turn it in various ways, reflect it back through mirrors to test how it's moving, whether it's the Earth that's moving or if it's the atmosphere around us.
It's very interesting. I used to do a lot of travel, air travel, in a previous job, and I would be, Eric, in an airplane at 30,000 feet, and I remember very clearly looking out the window, because many times I had a window seat, and I would be looking at the horizon, and I would, scan the horizon, looking for some curvature, and always thinking to myself, well, when does it start to curve? Because it was flat as flat can be.
Right, and you can look out the other side window at the same time, and you'll see the horizon out the other side window at your eye level as well. Which, if you think about it, again, if it was a ball, no matter how big the ball is, if you were seeing the horizon out one side of the window, the other side of the window should be looking off into space. You shouldn't be able to see the horizon, or at least not at eye level. You should have to be looking down significantly. It should have a different variance from the other side.
Right, because the other side should reflect the actual curvature, is what you're saying. So there should be nothing there.
Right. And also, when you're in a plane going an average of 500 miles per hour, if you do the curvature equation for a ball Earth 25,000 miles in circumference, you would have to dip the nose downward about a half a mile every minute just to maintain your altitude. Because otherwise, going straight, you just go off into outer space. Just going straight if the Earth was a ball. So pilots would have to correct their course downwards over a half a mile a minute. And they don't do this at all. They just go up to their desired altitude and stay there until they have to come down. And this is a good point about space travel, too. If all you have to do is just go in a straight line, maintaining a straight line, why do you have to go up in a rocket to go out into outer space like all the space agencies do? Why can't you go into outer space just using a plane?
Yeah, good point. Well, let me ask this, Eric. Now, we know that as we're talking about rockets and all that good stuff, we're going to get into the whole discussion about gravity, and that the heliocentrists will argue that gravity pulls the atmosphere with the Earth's spin, and that is the reason why we do not sense movement. Do I have that right?
Yes, some have claimed that.
Okay. So now let me use this example here because I've heard this before. It was actually on some forums, and a couple of people that I had the discussion with will bring this up. And let me see if I can make sense out of this. Many people who believe in the globe Earth or heliocentrists will use the ball in the moving train example. What they're saying is if two people are in a train, let's just say they're 20, 30 feet apart in a particular car in a train, and the train's moving at 60 miles an hour, and they throw a ball, well, they can throw that ball back and forth to each other, and because they can do that, it proves that movement has no bearing on that type of activity. So I guess then what they try to do is they then to parlay that into, well, the Earth is spinning, that's moving. You could throw the ball in your backyard. It's the same theory as if you're in a train, a moving train, and throwing a ball back and forth to each other. What's your take on that? Why is that explanation in your mind not valid?
Well, at best, those explanations are just trying to explain away what we see and feel, obviously. So if you're going to say that the Earth is spinning and that the atmosphere is spinning with it, then you're going to have to come up with some explanation for why we don't experience it. So they've got plenty of explanations using gravity and other things, relativity, frames of reference, inertia. They'll claim a bunch of different things, but all it really is doing is explaining away what's obvious. And what's obvious is that we're not spinning. As far as gravity is concerned, gravity is simply density. And the knighted Freemason Sir Isaac Newton changed density to gravity using the heliocentric model. So instead of things falling down, they are sucked into the center of massive objects. So what we see is that dense, heavy things fall down and light things rise up. So in nature, something suspended in a medium will rise or fall based on its relative density. Now they're trying to say that that's gravity, and gravity is this magnetic-like force which pulls things into the center of large masses. And so this is how they're changing science, changing the terminology to fit in with their ball model. And with their ball model, there is no up and down anymore. So they say space is infinite, up and down is completely relative, speed is relative, like you were just saying in the train example, all motion is relative. So by using these, and that's what Einstein's whole theory of relativity is explaining away your common sense. They use these kind of explanations to say that you can't know what up is, you can't know what down is, you can't know where the center or the edge of the universe is. So relativity basically just does away with your own common sense. And I call it absolute relativity because it's their new absolute now, is that everything's relative, so you can't know, you can't say anything definitive anymore. The flat earth is too definitive for them, so they want to stay in speculation, science fiction mode all the time. And they're able to do that with those kind of pseudoscience explanations, which have been taught to us in school, so everyone thinks that Sir Isaac Newton is some scientific genius, and Copernicus is a genius and everything, and some yoga teacher from Bangkok couldn't possibly figure out a 500-year scientific conspiracy. But I'm here to tell you that your common sense, your eyes, your experience are telling you the truth. You don't have to listen to NASA. You don't have to listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson. You don't even have to listen to me. The Earth is flat and motionless, just as it appears. Everything in the sky is revolving around us, just as it appears. The sun and moon are the same size, just as they appear. The sun, moon, and stars are all just lights up in the sky, just as they appear. The stars are stars. They're not suns millions of light years away. They're stars. They are what they seem. Everything's just as it appears. Everything's okay.
Now, the thing also is that gravity is taught as a fact. And gravity, in fact, is a theory. Am I correct?
Yeah, they can't even give you an example of an object so massive that by virtue of its mass alone causes other objects to stick to or orbit around it, as they claim gravity does. And they can't even get that straight. What is it that gravity does here? Does it keep us stuck to the Earth so it pulls things and sticks them there? Or, like they say the moon does, it causes it to orbit in a perpetual circular motion around the Earth. So what is this gravity? I mean, if they want it to, it causes things to stick to it. If they want it to, it causes other things to orbit around it. When they want it to, it causes the Earth's tides to be lifted by the moon, they say. But not all of Earth's water. No, just the oceans. All the lakes, ponds, and inland waters, those are completely unaffected. But the moon lifts the tides, sure. And gravity is why spherical planets exist in the first place, because it causes everything to tend towards a vortex, and the planets and everything spun into their current shape. That's what they say. And it all came about because of a godless, random, big bang cosmic accident, and through chance evolution of a blind, dumb universe, animals and humans and the diversity and complexity of nature just randomly came into existence from their non-God science explanation that they're trying to get everyone to buy into with this whole heliocentric spinning ball Earth mythos we've been fed for the past 500 years.
It's interesting about gravity. As you mentioned, it's kind of the catch-all. And when you start talking about it from a planetary perspective, when they put it into that realm, you think of gravity as some awesome power, has the ability to keep the equilibrium in the solar system and the universe and so on. But yet is a very simple kind of illustration which makes a lot of people think. And I think I got it from one of your videos, one of your interviews. Well, then how come that gravity that it's able to keep the Earth and the moon and the sun and everything else in place, then how come birds can fly, an insect can fly? In other words, it seems to not prevail or not be there or not be that important when it comes to those types of things. But when it comes to trying to explain why the solar system's intact, then it's monumental.
Absolutely right. So when they want it to, gravity is able to cause buildings, people, and the entire atmosphere to stick to the spinning ball Earth. But it's also weak enough to allow little bugs and birds and the smoke out of a cottage home to rise straight upwards without being affected by any of this. Clouds meander their course in different directions, even simultaneously different directions at different altitudes. Yet they say that gravity is holding the atmosphere and spinning it violently 1,000 miles per hour. If that was the case, also shooting bullets or flying planes in all cardinal directions would result in different results. If you're firing east on an eastward spinning ball versus firing west, you go significantly further one way than the other. Same with a plane. If the average commercial plane gone 500 miles per hour under 1,000 mile per hour eastward spinning ball Earth, your eastward destinations would come up behind you long before you could ever reach them. And the gravity causing the atmosphere to spin with it can't explain away these kind of anomalies as much as they would try to do so, and they do on the forums and all the different science guys on the Facebook groups and whatnot. They try till they're blue in the face to argue these kind of concepts like gravity, but they're just magical catch-all terms that they use when they're backed into a corner and can't explain things away with anything else. So like you said, gravity somehow is strong enough to just hold on all the oceans and to curve the water around the ball Earth somehow, but it's weak enough that little birds and bugs can escape its grips quite easily.
Or that fish can swim. I mean, if it's going to hold the ocean in place.
Right. It's magic.
I was watching an interview recently. It was somebody had put a clip up. I forgot who it was, but they had Neil deGrasse Tyson on that clip, and it's the one that gets played a lot. And he's talking about how the Earth is no longer round, even though they show us a perfect sphere. That it's now pear-shaped.
Yeah, well, an oblate spheroid. They change it over and over again. It starts out as a sphere, and every picture you've ever seen is a perfect circle, a perfect sphere.
Right.
And then they tell you, oh, actually, it's an oblate spheroid, and it's flattened out at the poles. Well, what? Every picture you've released, or almost every picture, there's a few that do show an oblate spheroid, but plenty more that show a sphere. And almost none of them show the new thing they're saying, which is that it's pear-shaped. So it's an oblate spheroid, flattened at the poles, and bulges out more in the southern hemisphere than in the north. And none of the pictures reflect that. So they definitely have to get their story straight about what it is before they start giving us these pictures. And like I said, if you do take a good look at the Apollo pictures and the newer pictures, they're fake. They're CGI. The very early images, they were actually done through a round window in a high-altitude plane, and you can see a video of them faking it in that documentary, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Right.
But since then, they've just been doing computer crap, and it gets worse and worse. Have you seen some of the new Chinese and Japanese space agency stuff? Like,
yeah.
They just did one on the moon. It's amazing they let them do these, because they're just making it so obvious now that it's fake. I encourage everyone to check out the new Chinese and Japanese footage. It's even worse than NASA. Worse than Hollywood. I mean, that movie Gravity is more convincing than the Apollo missions, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
I think George Clooney and Sandra Bullock might have been in space.
Well, that's why I say to people when they talk about, well, how come we haven't been back to the moon in 45 years? I said, well, because they don't need it anymore. Now they have Hollywood, right? I mean, back then, they put a whole show on about the Apollo landings, and haven't been back there in 45 years. But now what we have is just many, many movies and science fiction shows and so on that depict the story that they want to communicate. Mm-hmm. And so they don't need to fake missions anymore. All they need to do is send people to a movie theater.
And when you go to see the original, NASA has lost all the original Apollo moon landing footage and telemetry data. So to try and verify the original footage or the data that's in the modules that supposedly went to and from the moon, you can't check those now. So there's no physical confirmable evidence that they were anywhere but a sound studio.
Yeah, and I want the audience to understand what you just said. Folks, what Eric is saying, that the most heralded, most famous accomplishment of mankind, of humans, the landing on the moon, NASA lost everything.
Oops, $30 billion. Sorry.
They're claiming there's nothing in their archives, nothing in storage, nothing in a cardboard box someplace that has anything to do with the Apollo missions. It's all gone. So I know that's probably going to sound very, very bizarre to a lot of people, but you can do your own research and do your homework, and that's what you're going to find has happened and is what they're saying. It's truly amazing. Now, Eric, let me ask you this question. Now we're on the point of NASA, and we kind of just already have pushed into this conversation, but a lot of folks will say, come on now, are you saying that everything that NASA has put out, everything is a hoax? All these pictures. You're going to tell me there's nothing that they put out that is actually real? And I've had conversations with folks like this. There have been people who are in the alternative movement, as an example, that even though they claim to be critical thinkers and free thinkers, will not get their head wrapped around or even entertain the premise of the flat earth theory. They will openly admit that the Apollo missions were hoaxed and NASA can't be trusted, that it's a black ops organization and so on. But when you try to segue into, okay, well, let's take that and let's walk into the flat earth theory, they reject it, because then the fallback argument becomes, well, not everything can be a hoax. So, I think you're being uber conspiratorial, Mike. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it just is that deep. It just is. And they're lost in their science fiction fantasies. I think a lot of people that know that the Apollo missions are faked and NASA's lying to us, they want to think that what they're really lying about is that we've got a base on the dark side of the moon, and there's reptilian aliens, like David Icke says, controlling us from the hollow moon base with mind control beams, and it's a lot deeper than you know, Mike. And that's that's because they're stuck in this downward spiral. That they're in some other branch of the rabbit hole. They've dug themselves a new hole somewhere where they can't get free of the spinning ball NASA mythos, because they probably already invested or spun their knowledge base in some other direction involving extraterrestrials or, like I said, reptilians on the moon or who knows what else. But the most common sense conspiracy, I was just talking about this with a friend, the most common sense conspiracy is the flat Earth. I mean, all these other conspiracies, 9/11 and stuff, I mean, I'm as big a conspiracist as anyone else. I think there's quite a bit of evidence for many, many, many conspiracies. But really, the flat, motionless Earth is, not only is it the greatest conspiracy of all, it's also the easiest to prove. I mean, it just is flat and motionless, just as it appears. And the more you look into it, the more you try to debunk the ball Earth, and the more you look into the flat Earth proofs, you're going to see how obvious it actually was, and how brainwashed we've all been, and many of us still are, to ridicule this concept and to think that there's nothing to this, and to think that NASA and Neil deGrasse Tyson and these people with the Hubble telescope and all these technologies that they supposedly have showing us these amazing images from billions of miles away and everything. It's all just a big mind control hoax. And for someone to tell you, yes, all of NASA is a big hoax, it would just be like telling you, yes, Hollywood is actually fiction. It's not nonfiction. And everyone going, really? And I was believing it. Or like, if you, as a kid, you thought World Wrestling Entertainment was real, and then somebody points out for you, look at how he stomps on the ground when he slaps the guy. Look how he's pulling the punch and it's not really hurting. See how that canvas gives way quite a bit? See how, and that's what it's like when someone starts breaking down some of these NASA images and videos for you to see. You start seeing the guys in 2 times motion bouncing on the moon. You realize, they just sped the video, they just slowed the video down a little bit, and the flag waving and all the things. You look into it, you're going to find that you've been had on the whole moon landing thing, as well as the spinning ball, and that's what NASA's purpose of existence is in the first place. That's why the whole moon landing was hoaxed in the first place, so that they could have an excuse to get out far enough to tell you that they're giving you an authentic picture of the entire ball Earth that they've been telling you about for the past 500 years but haven't been able to prove. But once you had that photographic evidence, oh man, then everybody was sure. Well, you heliocentric guys for the past 500 years, you were right. But I'll tell you, before NASA's existence, this was still a heated debate. The flat Earth topic was not case closed back in the 1800s. You can read a lot of these old flat Earth books, and this was a raging debate. This was the debate in science around the turn of the 19th century. So NASA has done a great job in completely quelling that debate and causing anyone like myself who tries to speak out about it to be endlessly ridiculed and called a crazy conspiracy theorist, when all I'm telling you is that your senses, your eyes, and your experience are correct, and they're lying to you. That's all.
Have you, Eric, have you been personally attacked by NASA or the government?
Well, I just restarted the International Flat Earth Research Society, which was originally run by Charles Johnson, and he had his house burned down with all of his flat Earth materials and correspondence, and he swore that it was a NASA agent that did it. Myself, I get regular death threats from Freemasons and people online, and have for quite a while, even before this flat Earth stuff. But it's certainly picked up now. So I've never had anything come of it so far, and be as it may, I'm not going to stop. I don't know, I've got the truth. If they, honestly, if they were to come after me and kill me or do whatever, all that would do is let everybody know that I was right and Charles Johnson was right and all the other flat earthers were right. And, kill me if you need to, but this message is going to spread regardless. I think of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, strike me down if you will, but I'll become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. So, not to taunt them, but regardless of what you do, this is coming out. And whether they kill me or not, the world is going to know, and the world is knowing. Like you said, this is gaining traction fast, because this is the truth. Intelligent people worldwide are figuring it out, and they're getting on the movement of of telling people, spreading this truth, because this really is the greatest conspiracy. And when you can open your eyes to this, you see everything else much clearer. You can see that there really is a global conspiracy. There really is a worldwide historic conspiracy over many generations, and it's a lot bigger than just the flat Earth. But once you wrap your head around the flat Earth, you see that this is part of the big base of where everything's coming from. And there's even future manipulations being set up. This whole alien extraterrestrial thing, everybody's being programmed to believe that there are other physical beings from other physical planets in outer space, which float around out there. We can talk about that later, but there are no physical extraterrestrials, and there is no other physical planets. Plane with a T on the end. We're on a plane here, and the other things which have been called planets are just stars. They're wandering stars. As you can see, if you look out at the sky, you can't tell the difference between what they call stars and what they call planets. They all just look like little circular dots of light in the sky, and that's all we're ever going to be able to confirm, unless you want to believe the likes of NASA and everyone else who's lied to you about everything else and given you CGI pictures of the planets. Challenge everyone to type in real planet footage or something of the like into YouTube or Google, and you won't find a single convincing video of Saturn or Jupiter or Mars or all these other spinning ball planets they claim exist. It's all clearly CGI animation. It's not even that good. Once you free yourself from the indoctrination and allow yourself to consider the fact that you're looking at a computer-generated animation, you'll notice that you're definitely always looking at a computer-generated animation. These are not videos of some satellite Hubble telescope floating out there in outer space, catching these perfectly floating balls out there. It's just a computer simulation, and we've been under hypnosis for decades.
Well, on that point, I remember years ago when we were talking about the Hubble telescope, I used to always say, well, why don't they point the Hubble telescope at the moon so that we can get a nice clear picture of what the moon looks like, because the Hubble's taking pictures of everything else with pristine clarity. Nebula, and we're getting pictures back from supposed craft that are flying past Saturn and Jupiter, and we're getting these beautiful, beautiful, very clear, concise pictures coming back. Yet, we cannot get one single clear picture of the moon. And I'm talking about other than the nonsense that is tied to the Apollo missions. And you take that a step further, why can't the Hubble telescope take a picture of the Earth? So we don't see any of that stuff, and just right there, in my mind, that raises a gigantic question mark that you have to start to think through.
Absolutely, and there's supposedly 20,000 plus satellites floating around up there as well,
right,
which you never see those in photographs, and you never see authentic photographs coming from them. All they ever give you are these admitted composite images, which they say come from ribbons of imagery received as data from the satellites. Apparently the satellites can't just take a regular photograph like everything else can. They have to receive these ribbons of imagery that they then splice in, admittedly, in Photoshop. So they have the perfect excuse why all of these images supposedly coming from satellites look completely fake, because they're composites.
A lot of folks have done tests by sending up balloons, amateurs, researchers. I shouldn't even call them amateurs, but researchers that have sent balloons up, and these balloons have gone 100,000 feet, which is almost 20 miles up with a camera. And guess what? The Earth doesn't have any curvature.
Right, unless you're the Red Bull dive sponsored by NASA, which showed a wide-angle lens view out the side of his little pod there.
Right.
So all the way from the very base, you could already see the curvature of the Earth. And then as he got higher and higher, the exact same curvature of the Earth remained all the way up to 128,000 feet, because it was the curve of a wide-angle lens, which they often use on their stuff. Just like a GoPro. Actually, a lot of cameras just automatically have some type of fisheye wide-angle property to them, so they distort the level horizons. They actually had a second camera in the Red Bull dive on the inside, and you can see when the door opens, this one wasn't a wide-angle lens, and the horizon was right at the eye level and completely flat.
Yeah.
Then they cut the outside one, and then you got the big bulge again. So these effects are just achieved by simple camera tricks. The fact that the horizon is at eye level at that height already tells you that you couldn't possibly be on a ball.
Now, let me ask this, Eric. Now we're talking about the fact that it's not a ball, it doesn't have a curvature. So some folks who are new to this might be asking, well, what does the flat Earth look like? What is it shaped like? What's the design? Is there a dome? How are the oceans contained? How come the water doesn't fall off the edge? Because, that's one of the premises that are put out there as to why the flat Earth theory doesn't work, because the water would just pour off the edges and we wouldn't have any oceans. So from your perspective, what does it look like?
Yeah, so everybody assumes that there must be an edge because they've been taught the infinite space ball Earth cosmology where Earth has a convex edge and somehow gravity holds the oceans in on the ball, and they think that's rational. But then when I tell them that Antarctica is an ice wall that surrounds us 360 degrees and holds the oceans at level, that's crazy. What's beyond the Antarctic ice plateau is unknown as far as I'm concerned, still a mystery. So there could feasibly be an edge out there somewhere, but that would be well beyond the oceans. You wouldn't be falling off the edge of the ocean. Or there could be some barrier or a dome, as many cultures throughout history have talked about. Or it could even be an infinite plane and just go on forever. Just, cold, snow, ice, wind, and darkness forever. Who knows at this point? They don't allow independent explorers into Antarctica. You can only go there on their pre-approved package tours or scientific missions. So even though, like Admiral Byrd said, that there's vast resources there, there's been a 57-country, however many decade treaty going on since, I think, the late 50s, not allowing corporations or anyone independently to go in there, and they do enforce that, and they do patrol the area, as people like Jarl Anderhoy have found out when they try to independently go to Antarctica. He was arrested and fined and did some jail time. So they don't want you to go out to the outer perimeter of the flat Earth, which is the Antarctic ice barrier. Though explorers back in the 1700s, like Captain Cook, for instance, tried to go all the way around Antarctica and took over 3 years doing it and was 60,000 miles about it. Now on the ball Earth, they say that Antarctica is only about 12,000 miles around, but there's plenty of ships that have attempted to circumnavigate Antarctica, and it's taken 3 or 4 years, and they've clocked over 60,000 miles, not going a straight line, but actually trying to find inlets in this big ice wall. So it's not completely a circle. There's inlets and whatnot, but they could never get in. They just kept going around until they came back. Nowadays, of course, they tell you that Antarctica is a tiny ice continent on the bottom of the ball, but there are flights which should be going directly over it, which go all manner of ways around it, because that's not the actual model, and they can't go straight across it. But their excuse is that it's too cold. They claim that it's too cold if you go straight across. You can go, they fly on the border of Antarctica. They fly to Antarctica, but they say if we were to try to circumnavigate and fly straight across it, it would be too cold for the airplane's technology, whatever, which is nonsense, because they claim to have gone into space and the moon, which is far colder and far hotter than Antarctica claims to be. So I don't see why this technology couldn't be used. But if you look at flight paths, especially in the southern hemisphere, on the flat map versus the azimuthal equidistant versus the ball Earth map, you'll see that flights make much more sense on the flat Earth map. There's ridiculous tangents that flights go. If you're looking at a ball Earth map, makes no sense. They'll go completely off track to refuel somewhere just so they can cut another angle and come back the other way. But when you look at it on a flat Earth map, they're actually going in a fairly straight line.
That segues right into my next question. There's a company out there, I think it's out of New Zealand or Australia, and it claims that it's making flights across Antarctica. So is that a bogus claim, or are they using deception?
there are flights which go over Antarctica, but there's no flights which go circumnavigate under the ball, as they claim, Antarctica from one side to the other and come up the other side. There's nothing like that.
Very interesting. And like you said, supposedly in 1969 they sent man to the moon, but they can't fly over Antarctica because it's too cold.
And can't go back to the moon since 72 because, everyone's brainwashed already. We don't need to.
Too crazy. Now, let me ask you, Eric, because some of the other questions, and, I wrote some of these questions down so that I can keep myself organized here. And these are some of the questions that I've been asked and so on. So I figured I would ask you since you're the expert. How about the sun and the moon? Is the sun really 93 million miles away and the moon 235,000 miles away? Or are they much closer than what we've been told?
Flat earthers throughout the centuries have measured using sextants and plane trigonometry and found the sun and moon to be 32 miles in diameter and only a few hundred to a few thousand miles off the surface of the Earth. And those numbers vary a little bit, but nothing like the statistics of the heliocentric model, which have varied from 3 million miles away, Copernicus claimed the sun was, up to nowadays they're claiming 93 million miles away. And throughout the past 500 years, that number has gradually risen to where it is now. And that's just to try and fit in with their model, because so many things that refute their model, they just have to constantly backpedal and reverse engineer explanations to come up with things to explain away our common sense and experience.
Again, I know this is subjective and it's going to be based upon your perspective and maybe your thoughts. I've heard it a couple of ways. There's a dome, there's no dome. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen enough convincing evidence one way or another to say that there definitely is or isn't a dome. Whether that space is or isn't finite. I would, if I had to bet on it, I would guess that it's an enclosed system. It's a finite universe, and there is some sort of a dome. I think the physics seems to work out better that way. The whole infinite plane concept, or an infinite world with infinite space. I don't know. It's possible. I'm not sure. I'm totally open to it. I think it's a mystery. I don't want to really say one way or the other. I think that those ideas, what's above, beyond, and potentially below the flat Earth, are definitely open to speculation.
Right.
But for instance, below the flat Earth, we've only gotten to the Mariana Trench in the Pacific, and we've only gotten drilled down 8 miles into the Earth. So when they show you their typical ball Earth model that you get in textbooks, and it shows the outer core, the inner core, and the outer mantle, and the inner mantle, and the crust, and all these layers of supposed bedrock and whatnot that makes up the ball Earth, in reality, we've never actually drilled down through the crust to have any idea if there's any sort of mantle or core or liquid molten metal core like they say there is that causes the geomagnetism. That's complete theory. So when I tell you that I don't know, but NASA tells you they do know, NASA's just lying to you by telling you that they know what's beneath the Mariana Trench or what's beneath 8 miles down. I'm just sticking with the evidence. The Russian Kola Ultra Deep went 8 miles down, and they couldn't get any further. And the what's his name, Mike DeGruy, he went down in one of those deep submarine capsule things, and he found a whole nother layer of ocean underneath the ocean, which was super saline, and he couldn't go down in it with his submarine. He just bounced off of it, which is reminiscent of the Bible's Genesis first chapter, talking about dividing the waters from the waters with the firmament.
Yeah.
And this layer of ocean potentially could be, maybe that's what's under the Earth, so to speak, is this super saline layer of infinite or non-infinite ocean, and then the other oceans, and then the Earth is on top of that. And that's how the Bible and the Egyptian myth and a lot of creation myths say that, is that first there was the water, and then they pulled the land out from the water, and then out of the land came man and the animals and whatnot. I'm definitely what would you call it? I believe in intelligent design, but I don't follow any particular religion. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the Bible or in any one holy text or religion. I think that's closing us in too much. If you just pick one religion, you pick one book, and you say, "Oh, all the truth is in here," like a lot of people do, I think that's closing yourself in. I think there's truth to be seen in all religions and all holy books, and that they should all be revered and regarded as holy. And anything can be inspired. How come supposedly just these few apostles, throughout a course of 1400 years, they're the only ones that have ever been inspired by God or whatnot? I think the whole library, the whole internet is inspired. The whole human race is inspired by God. I think that we come from God and we were devolved from God instead of evolved from apes, as we've been taught. And I think that's a big part of what this conspiracy is about moving us from the place of significance and importance metaphysically and physically, so that we just feel that we're an insignificant speck of dust in the corner of the universe and came from a godless Big Bang, so our life has no purpose, there's no meaning to everything, so you might as well just be a stupid consumer like they want you to be, and easily controlled and give in to authority and whatnot. Like I said, I think this conspiracy, it debases us in such a way that we can't even see it. People often say, well, what does it matter whether the earth is flat or a ball? It doesn't affect my life in any way, which is really an ignorant statement, because it's the most fundamental thing. What's beneath your feet, what's over your head, what is this reality about? To claim to not care or think that it's not important in any way to figure out what's really going on. Well, there you go. I mean, that just proves what they've done. They've turned people into zombies that can actually say that it doesn't matter what reality is. How does that change my life? Well, if reality doesn't change your life, then what does that say about your life?
Exactly. Well, it's gotten folks down to the point where they are so apathetic and dumbed down. I mean, we were talking before about Neil deGrasse Tyson saying that it's now shaped like a pear, and he puts it out there, and who really looks into it? Who really cares? People applaud. I think the show he was on, people were clapping, and I thought to myself, well, really, we're in big trouble as far as lack of critical thinking and lack of free thinking. We really are in big, big trouble. And so, folks, I'm talking to the audience now, Eric. We need to step it up as far as the awakening goes. You really need to put your thinking cap on, and you really need to start to look at these things and look at them with a critical eye and with a critical mind.
Yeah. Like you said, of course we've been indoctrinated into this, so it seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
And we're with you. We're not saying that this doesn't seem ridiculous. But I challenge everyone to just look into it some more. Look into it more and more. Make it a thing to try and debunk it, if you will. Even if you want to do it that way. Negative reinforcement works too. Try as you will. You're only going to find proofs for the flat, motionless Earth. You're not going to confirm that you're on a spinning ball.
Now, Eric, let me ask you these questions, because these are a couple that have come up also. And by the way, I just want to state my perspective is that there is most likely a dome based upon the research I've done and the things I've taken a look at. But again, it's conjecture because we really don't know, but it seems to make sense to me. And basically, if you go back to, like you said, some of the ancient texts, which are ubiquitous, by the way, a lot of folks like to talk about the Bible and the firmament, but it goes way beyond that into many different types of civilizations, which talked about this type of structure and design of the earth, being that it is flat, for lack of a better term. But what about things like meteors? People will say, well, how do meteors appear then? They must be coming from outer space. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a complex subject, meteors, because what is a meteor? I don't have a definitive answer for this one yet, but I've definitely been looking into it. Like, I've actually seen shooting stars, which they say are meteors, shooting across the sky and then burning up or something. They disappear. They just kind of trail off.
Right.
I've also seen, and people on my forum have also mentioned seeing this as well, objects which appear as stars, and they're relatively motionless while you're looking at them. Of course, every star other than Polaris is moving, but you can't see it except in a time lapse. Yet my girlfriend and I, we saw this star just within a couple seconds rise up maybe 15 degrees in the sky and then stop again, as if it was conscious or whatnot. Stars also twinkle and change colors, like the song suggests. How I wonder what you are. I really do wonder what stars actually are, and what meteors or shooting stars or asteroids or all these other terms that they've given to the shooting lights in the sky that we see, what they actually are. So I'm open to speculation as to what that is. As far as these big craters that they've shown on Earth, a lot of these look to be some sort of, what would you call it, a volcanic eruption type of thing coming from underneath sometime in history. Not so much like something that has impacted on the surface, as they're trying to say. You can see some of the pictures on the forum. We've been trying to dissect it, whether there actually have been impacts of some big rocks from outer space or not. There's also the Libyan glass, which has been found in the desert, and people think that this could be like the sun heating up parts of the ice or glass dome and then causing it to fall down, and that could be meteors. So there's definitely a lot of theories. I suppose they could be giant rocks out there in space getting ready to shoot down on us, but from what I've heard from Wernher von Braun and NASA and some of the things they've said, to me, asteroids, just like in that movie, what's that movie about the asteroids that are going to kill us? Armageddon, and others. They've had other asteroid movies just like that. They seem to be wanting to use this as a fear mechanism, and Wernher von Braun said that as the masses woke up to their fake terrorist threat, that they would unleash the fake asteroid threat, and when they woke up to the fake asteroid threat, that we'd play the final card, which is the fake alien invasion threat, which politicians throughout the decades have talked about how all the nations would come together if we thought there was some off-world enemy or even friend, which caused us to all unite, and that would be a way that they could get their new world order, which I think is in the making. I think that this deception isn't over. This, and what NASA's doing here, they're about to go to Mars, apparently, right? We just went on to an asteroid, that Rosetta.
Right.
Crap, it's complete CGI. I recommend everyone to check that one out. It's hilarious. But yeah, what's next? They're gonna find water on Mars. Have they found that yet? For sure, that's coming. And then some life on Mars, and then we'll have our aliens. They'll probably unleash some hybrid genetic experiment monstrosity and call it an alien. Who knows what they'll do? But I think that NASA, as the heliocentrists have been doing for the past 500 years, they're just going to keep on adding on the BS as long as we keep swallowing it. It just keeps getting thicker and thicker. And that's why this is so ridiculous, supposedly so ridiculous now, is because we're so deep into this indoctrination of the spinning ball Earth, Big Bang, evolution, you're a monkey, you're spinning around the sun. We're so deep into this, someone telling you that you're on a flat, motionless Earth that was created by a higher intelligence. That's crazy,
Yeah. It's interesting. I stopped, I run a blog too, and I actually have stopped putting videos up, and I would put them up as points of interest, about Mars and the rover and everything else, because you'd always get these ridiculous videos that would say leaked NASA footage, leaked this, leaked that, and so what we're finding is on Mars, the rover finds a book. These are actual things that I've actually seen these videos where they're claiming that these are actual rover pictures and taking pictures of these things. One was Apollo's head was discovered on Mars, and there was another one that showed. I don't know if people remember. Maybe you don't. You're a younger guy than I am. But when I was younger, there was a show called Lost in Space, and there was the Jupiter 2, which was the spaceship in Lost in Space, and it had a picture of this craft that supposedly was just sitting on a flat land on Mars, and it just got to the point where it became so bizarre that it became unbelievable that these things are being leaked and these things are being put out into the public domain. And the thought that I came to was the reason why this is being done is because it's conditioning.
Yep, absolutely. This is how they do it. It's the Hegelian dialectic. So, for instance, they'll have Richard Hoagland, ex-NASA expert, he was in NASA, but now he's out, but he's exposing things that NASA doesn't want you to know. So he goes on CNN with pictures of the face on Mars and the pyramid on Mars, and he's saying this is what NASA is hiding. And then officially, NASA says, nope, we didn't see that. That's not there. And then the synthesis effect is that everyone seeing this believes the whistleblower, the supposed whistleblower, and they believe NASA's covering it up. So actually all it does is solidifies the brainwashing.
Yeah.
It makes the indoctrination sink in even more because you're seeing it from both sides. It's just like the Roswell thing, the UFO landing, right? Apparently there was a crash landing, alien bodies recovered, it's in the newspaper, and then the next day they say, oh no, it was a weather balloon. Sorry about that. We reported it wrong. And then everybody goes, hey, wait a minute. And the synthesis effect of the first the thesis, then the antithesis, the synthesis effect, the Hegelian dialectic, this is how the indoctrination, this is how they marinate you. So that, like that Hulu commercial where Alec Baldwin is sucking in your brain. This is how they marinate your brain with this Hegelian dialectic so that you're ready to receive the indoctrination 100%, where you think that, oh, this whistleblower is telling me the truth. Now, in reality, the whole thing's a big BS story, and they've presented it to you in this way with these whistleblowers so that they become your heroes and the authorities, and then you really believe them that they're fighting against the man and they're bringing out this information, when in reality they're just getting you into an even deeper level of indoctrination than they could have if they came. Imagine if NASA came out and was like, yes, we saw aliens. Yes, it was. You'd be like, what? No way. So they don't do that. They deny it, and they have a fake whistleblower come out and tell you that, oh, I got the truth. Look at me. I'm Richard Hoagland on CNN pointing at a picture of a face on Mars. Yeah. And why would they do that? Why would they show us a face on Mars and pyramids on Mars? Well, again, they're trying, and ancient aliens, you see it on the History Channel, they're trying to weave this mythology where we are a hybrid slave race that came from aliens from another planet, and that we were seeded here. Have you seen this meme going through the conspiracy internet new age?
This would be the Anunnaki, right? I mean, it's just we were created to be a slave race to mine gold.
Right. That sounds like an interesting myth. I bet there are just like the alchemists, they were trying to create gold from base elements. But what are they talking about? Are they actually talking about physical gold and physical base elements? Were these Anunnaki actually talking about mining physical gold? Or were the alchemists and the Anunnaki, are all these talking about psychological, spiritual phenomenon and enlightenment, illumination, the thing that these Illuminatis are so obsessed about, the thing that ancient people used to know that life was about, that we're here to be enlightened, that we're here to learn and to grow spiritually. Like I said, this manipulation, this whole deception is getting us away from that. It's encouraging atheism and nihilism and purposelessness. They don't want you to know of your divine heritage and where you're coming from. They want you to think you came from monkeys. You're an ape. Stop thinking. Believe the authorities. We know what we're talking about. NASA, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan. They're gods.
That's a very interesting perspective. So your perspective would be that the Anunnaki story, humans, slave race, gold, is not about the actual mining of gold, but it's the actual in search of enlightenment?
Well, like in the Vedic cosmology and mythology, they'll talk about the suras and the asuras, or you've got the angels and the demons. You've always got this good and evil. And one way to talk about what we're doing here, what this life is all about, is from a standpoint of a battle between good and evil. Because that sure does seem to be what's going on here. It's like there's a big battle between good and evil taking place, and religions and holy texts throughout history have talked about this kind of battle. And so the asuras, the demons, they want to bring your consciousness down to your lower chakra, where it's all about survival and money and greed and selfishness and status and hedonism. And the angels, or the higher psychological frequencies, the enlightened way of being, is like Jesus or Buddha or some of these other examples that have been given to us, where you are compassionate and loving and forgiving and detached from the physical world, and try to attain higher spiritual, intellectual pursuits instead of base desires and physical accumulations in your life, you know. So they're trying to get us away from this, and I think that that's what I don't know particularly about the Anunnaki myth, whether that actually fits into this or how it fits into this, but I tend to think that a lot of these things, such as the literal historical idea of a Jesus Christ, for instance, are being taken as literal historical things when in fact they're myths, they're personifications. Jesus was never meant to be seen as a literal historical figure. The Gnostics who left the Orthodox Church as it was forming said that their Jesus could never take physical human form, and that they were trying to attain Christ consciousness, just like the Hindus try to attain Krishna consciousness. And the fact that Krishna and Christ sound so similar is also not a coincidence. It would be like if 2,000 years from now somebody came across an X-Men DVD and said, this is what they believed. They believed in these avatars, these X-Men. There was Nightcrawler, and then there was Wolverine, and then we have whole religions with a pope who dresses like Cyclops with the glasses on, and everybody goes and kisses his ring, and it would be like that. But the people who actually wrote these stories and created these myths did so as a personification of natural phenomenon. For instance, you've probably seen the Zeitgeist movies or whatever,
yeah,
where you see Jesus is representative of the sun, and he dies on the cross constellation as the sun does every year, and then it rises 1 degree after 3 days, and there's all these different, in a manger, the animals, the constellations, the 12 apostles are the 12 houses of his father, in astrology and whatnot. It goes on and on. You can read about it in my Atlantean Conspiracy book. These are just personifications of natural phenomenon.
right.
And when you see it that way, it's not even religion anymore. It's truth. I mean, it's true. It's just been personified in such a way that now we've literalized and historicized it. And that's why they tell you we're in 2015 right now, because they claim a literal historical person named Jesus lived here in Thailand. Did you know it's 2,558 right now? Because that's how long ago they claimed a literal historical guy named Buddha existed. But
right.
The Buddha myth is just like the Jesus myth and the Attis myth and the Dionysus myth and the Krishna myth and many other savior god-men myths throughout history. There's actually been 17. Jesus is the 17th crucified savior god-man in history. And it's so funny, the early Christian apologists even admitted that their Jesus Christ was just like Jupiter and Bacchus and Dionysus, and that when we talk about his immaculate conception and whatnot, we mean exactly what you meant about Jupiter and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, there's been whole volumes written by Christians about the fact that Christianity is just an amalgamation of other pagan myths and deities. But they've slowly over time literalized and historicized this to the point that now even talking about this right now, this is another one, right? Oh, he's saying that Jesus isn't a real person. Is this more or less heretical than the flat earth? I'm also a Holocaust denier, if anyone out there doesn't hate me yet.
Well, look, I agree with everything that you're saying. I've studied Christianity for many years, and the books are encoded messages. They are really, Christianity is really a mystery religion that was bastardized. Of course, they had to make it anthropomorphic. They had to make it something that it was not in order to keep the masses dumbed down. You're absolutely spot on.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you're right about that. They've turned religion into this thing that needs faith and needs to be believed in, whereas before it was just a fairy tale, which was known as a fairy tale, but a very, very intelligent fairy tale that you can tell your kids, and then as you grow up, this fairy tale becomes the basis for understanding the world around you in a very positive context. I think Christianity could be completely positive if it wasn't owned and operated by these Vatican Freemasons who control the interpretation, the official interpretation of what we read in that book, as well as the heads of other religions who also officiate the interpretations that we're allowed to have of what these holy scriptures are telling us. I recommend everyone read these books, but do so in the privacy of your own home, figuring it out for yourself, and don't go to any priests, pastors, popes, or anyone else trying to tell you what their interpretation is as anything other than a suggestion. I mean, your interpretation is superior to what anyone else can tell you. That's what religion does, isn't it? It tells you to give away your brain and your free will to me or this book, and you don't have to think anymore. You can just reference this book or reference this or that quote, and you don't have to actually live your life as a mystery anymore. You can pretend you know it all. And doesn't everybody's ego want to have that?
The Gospels, there's only 4 of them. You can read them and you can understand them for yourself. And what I find very interesting is they'll have the Gospel, and then what they'll do is a lot of these learning Bibles will then have 4 times the amount of pages to explain what it is that you just read. You know, so that they can, right? So they can tell you how
Don't
to
go think it for yourself.
Don't you be thinking, okay? Read the next couple of pages and then move on. So it's very interesting, and like I said, you're right on the money with this. Let me ask you this question, and you might say it doesn't really matter, Mike, because maybe these are all distractions and diversions from the flat Earth discussion. But some folks I've spoken to will point to, hey, GPS and HARP types of technologies. What's your take on stuff like that? When people bring up, well, look, you know what, we have GPS, and you're saying that the Earth is not a globe, but it's a global positioning. When we talk about HARP, and HARP is supposed to be bouncing off an atmosphere. So what does all that stuff mean to you? Or does it mean anything? Or like I said, is it all just a distraction, not worth talking about?
Back before they claimed that satellites existed, they already had advanced communication radio technologies spanning most of the Earth, with LORAN and other military technologies, as well as ham radio and whatnot. So the idea that we need to have these satellites spinning around, geostationary satellites out there in orbit, apparently moving at 16,000 miles per hour to keep up with the relative spin of the ball Earth beneath it, supposedly, and that this is an efficient and worthwhile way of using communication. All GPS is done through land-based towers, and things like Google Earth are taken with high-altitude planes, and most of them are just done with cars on street level.
Street level, yeah.
You don't need to have anything out there in outer space shooting pictures. You don't need anything in outer space bouncing radio signals, as they claim GPS is doing as well. Everything can be easily explained better through land-based technologies. For instance, satellites, they're supposedly in the thermosphere. The metals that they're made of should melt in the temperatures that they claim are happening in the thermosphere, as well as the fact that they claim satellites, space stations, astronauts, whatever, up in outer space just gets to a certain point and is able to just float indefinitely now. Unlike anything, you or I could ever try to send up, every amateur rocket, every amateur balloon, everything that ever has been sent up comes right back down. But NASA and these space agencies, somehow they're able to send things up which at a magical altitude, which you can't find anywhere because they don't want to tell you where the supposed altitude is, but it must be somewhere between 30 and, say, 200 miles, because after that they claim that they pop out into the vacuum of infinite space where gravity doesn't affect them, and they're able to just float around. And that's where these satellites are, just floating around up there. Not just floating, though. They're in this geosynchronous orbit with the Earth, so they're actually shooting at 16,000 miles per hour, but maintaining the exact same position relative to the spinning Earth at all this time. What's going on, you see? Now, did you know that satellites were actually invented by Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction author?
I didn't know that.
they shortly became science fact after that. The geostationary satellite, look it up. It was created by a science fiction author. And then within a decade, NASA claims to have sent a real one up there, and ever since then, that's where we get all our communications from. Satellite radio and all this stuff. They claim it's coming from these impossible metal things up there, 20,000 plus of them just spinning around. We can't see any of them. Well, actually, people claim to see them, right? I see a satellite. I see the space station. All anyone can see is moving lights, and who knows, like I said, who knows what these moving lights are? Orbs, stars, planes, UFOs. What they aren't, though, is floating astronauts, and space stations, and satellites. They're provably, those things are provably impossible. And you wouldn't be able to see them with your bare eyes anyway. Something hundreds of miles up in the atmosphere that's smaller than the size of a bus, as if you could see that.
The deception and the lies are just so pervasive, and they're just so deep that I swear it gives me a headache, a migraine. It's, you know, it's like we live in some kind of comic book. It's just unbelievable. Let me ask you this one. Here's another one that a question that comes up a lot. Well, if the Earth is flat, I'm going to read this one because I wrote it down. How come we can't see South America from Australia?
Yeah, so the skeptics want to say that, well, if the Earth is flat, my eyesight should be infinite. And, well, your eyesight's not infinite, regardless of how good a telescope you fasten to it. The atmosphere is not transparent. You can imagine the haze over a road on hot, humid days. The same thing happens. All telescopes are going to blur out long before you can see, hundreds or thousands of miles like that. You can, however, see much farther than would be possible on a ball of 25,000 miles in circumference. They claim that a ship going out on the horizon starts to disappear over the horizon hull first, and that's proof that it's going over the ball. And as it disappears down, 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 there you go, you're on a ball. But if you have a telescope, binoculars, or a zoom camera, as that hull disappears, and even you can watch the entire thing disappear. I'll get out a video. I'll probably link it here later on this week. So you guys watching this, you're probably looking at a video right now, and the video is showing a ship which has disappeared over the horizon, but you're zooming in on it, and then the entire thing comes back into view, which is impossible if it just descended over a wall of convex water like they're trying to tell you. What really happened is the ship just went beyond your visibility based on perception, based on perspective, rather. If you were to raise in altitude, you'd be able to see further. Or, again, as you zoom in, you're able to see further. This proves that the horizon is just the limit of your visibility from your perspective. And you can see much further by using an aid or by gaining altitude. These are supposed proofs of the ball Earth, but when you actually do them yourself, like the ships disappearing over the horizon, it becomes a proof of the flat Earth. So you're just taking their word for it, saying that, oh, look at that disappear, that's proof you're on a ball. But when you do it yourself and you zoom in, you have proof that you're on a flat plane. Yeah.
We were at the beach recently, Rebecca and I live in North Carolina. And visibility was great that day. The dome was clear, and it was about 4 or 5 miles out. And the guy was in a boat. It wasn't a large boat, and we can see his wake. As we're looking at it, we're saying, well, I don't think from that distance we're supposed to be seeing his wake. So it's very interesting once you set aside all of the dogma and you say, you know what, I'm going to clean slate this thing and let me just use my eyes and my brain and let me just observe and let me draw some conclusions. Let me ask you this one. I'm sure you saw this. The recent clip of this weatherman talking about the Superior Mirage, where somebody had filmed being able to see Chicago from Michigan, the Chicago skyline. And he was saying, you're not really seeing that. What you're seeing is a mirage, and I guess they called it a superior mirage, when clearly, in fact, what you were seeing was the coast or the skyline of Chicago. Did you see that clip?
I did, yeah. That photographer has been photographing several such horizon skyline views as well. That particular one, I think, was 60 miles away, and you can do the curvature formula and figures out to several hundred feet that it should be below the horizon, but it's not. There's many more. Mount McKinley's one good one in Alaska. People are able to see that, and we've got several photos on my forum of it from 130 miles away. So almost the whole thing should be beneath the horizon based on the ball formula, and it should be leaning back significantly if we're on a ball. But it's completely level, completely flat, and you can almost see the entire thing. The bottom part of the horizon will disappear, objects near the horizon will disappear in the distance. People will ask about that often, and that's just natural. If you watch a girl walking away wearing a dress, first you'll see her shoes disappear as she gets a quarter of a mile away, and then her ankles a half mile, and then it looks like a ghostly dress is just floating for a while, and then halfway up the dress is gone. And that's just perspective doing its thing, and you can see that happen. But again, the deniers, the ball earth skeptics, they'll come in and say, oh, see, I can't see the bottom of her legs, or, oh, I can't see the bottom of the boat. That means she's
right.
behind the ball. But it's all perspective. Any artist knows this. If you know about point perspective, it's exactly how the horizon works. It's the vanishing line of our perspective. Just like if you look at a hallway, a long hallway, the walls on either side of you are going to tend towards the middle, and the ceiling and the floor are going to tend towards the middle vanishing point, and that's what you're looking at. That's what a sunrise and a sunset is, a moonrise and a moonset. That's what's happening with those ships over the horizon. That's what's happening with the girl walking away from you. It's all just perspective.
Well, what's the rate of decline, Eric? We don't have to get into a great amount of math here, but just some very simple measuring sticks for folks. In other words, how many inches of feet over, let's say, a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, should somebody expect if you're on a globe, should we see a decline?
Using the Pythagorean theorem, it works out to about 8 inches, 7.935 per mile when you square the mile. So the first mile just sets your line of sight. The second mile would be 8 inches below that. The third mile would be 32 inches. The fourth mile, 72, 128, 200, and it goes exponentially there, following spherical trigonometry to follow the curve of the Earth. So after just a few miles, you should be several feet downward.
Okay.
And so but you can test this, and flat earthers through the centuries have tested this using lasers and telescopes and levels, theodolites, sextants, just a wooden plank on an A-frame, you name it. There's many ways to test this, and every time you test it, you're going to find that the surface of water is always level. This is just natural physics. We know this, that water, if unobstructed and uncontained, will flow outwards, finding it the easiest course to maintain its own level, right? So, but the ball earth model claims that the oceans are huge 100-mile walls of curved water curving around the ball. That's ridiculous. They say that gravity makes this possible, but you don't see that. You go to the beach and you see a completely flat horizon. You see water just ever so gently coming up on the shore. And rivers. Rivers wouldn't work on the ball earth. There's rivers that go for thousands of miles without declining an inch, or hundreds of miles without declining an inch. Yet on a ball earth, there would have to be rivers going in every single direction, and based on the inclination of the ball, it would have to be going uphill many times. Rivers would have to be going uphill. It's just totally impossible. But it's how it would have to be on a ball model. Same with train tracks. Engineers have said how it would be impossible to go to have a train have vertical curvature. So like when a train track, they're always horizontal except for very slight inclinations, which are always very carefully made, and you have to be careful when you're going over them. Yet if we were on a ball, then these railroad tracks that go for hundreds of miles, you'd have to be actually going up sometimes 5,000 plus feet from your original starting point in altitude to get to your destination. And it's totally impossible to do this on a train track.
Yeah.
And there's just never any curvature taken into account when engineers, surveyors, and architects are, for instance, making canals, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. They're completely, well, not the Panama Canal, but the Suez Canal is completely level throughout the entire thing, and the seas on either side are completely level. There's no locks or anything in between them, and they don't have to factor curvature for any of it. Same with the long bridges or anything. I've got a chapter on that in the book. Architects and engineers just do not need to factor in the supposed curvature of the Earth when making their structures.
Now, let me ask you this question, Eric. And I only have a couple more here because I don't want to tie up all your time, but this is a very, very fascinating discussion. You mentioned before about the whole alien hoax, false flag, Werner von Braun talking about the next step of false flags where alien invasion, and we've all heard these stories if you're into the conspiracy aspects. Do you believe that there are other beings, species, that are interacting with humans?
I've had experiences and read and heard friends who've experienced things on entheogens, psychedelics, certain natural substances, as well as endogenous DMT trips, which happen through Kundalini experiences and whatnot, where you basically trip out and see other consciousnesses, disembodied consciousnesses. And throughout history, different cultures have called them different things: gnomes, sprites, fairies, leprechauns, jinns, demons, angels. There's so many different names for them: succubus, incubus, all these different beings. But for instance, if you look at ayahuasquero paintings in the Amazon, these people that take ayahuasca, a DMT plant, they see UFOs, typical flying saucer, and aliens that come out of them. But instead of being extraterrestrial beings in physical crafts, they're extra-dimensional beings in non-physical crafts. And they're only accessible through these altered states of consciousness. And so cultures and shamans throughout history have found all these different ways to alter your consciousness through sensory overload or sensory deprivation, fasting, rhythmic drumming, dancing, ingesting entheogens, all these different ways, meditation. And you alter your state of consciousness so that you're able to perceive these other dimensions. And they talk about seeing these aliens and whatnot. And I think even so-called alien abduction encounters, where people claim they've been physically abducted by aliens, often they happen during sleep. They're asleep when it starts, and that's when your brain produces this DMT, this most psychedelic of all substances on Earth, is produced naturally in your pineal gland. I think a lot of people who think they're seeing aliens are having endogenous DMT trips, and they're just seeing these same spirit entities that shamans have been talking about for centuries. And we don't have a context for them anymore. And with today's Hollywood science fiction milieu, we just put everything into that box and we assume, oh, it's an alien. Whereas if we had grown up 500 years ago in, somewhere else, we might have called it a jinn or a demon or something else. So I do think that there's more to consciousness than just the plants, animals, and humans that we see here. I think there's other things out there, but it's quite highly speculative territory. And with the whole flat Earth thing, I try to keep my feet grounded and not theorize too much, and just talk about what I can prove and what has evidence. So as far as that's concerned, I don't really have much. How can you have evidence for non-physical phenomenon?
Right.
It's quite difficult. Though I did try. I have a whole book called Spiritual Science I wrote, which is just that, all the evidence for non-physical phenomenon, all the scientific evidence that we could find proving it. So there's definitely a non-physical mental reality beyond the physical. Like we were talking about before, I definitely think, and quantum physics and other branches of science have proven that consciousness is a priori. Consciousness exists outside of and before space, time, and matter. So in other words, we come from intelligence or consciousness, and the space, time, matter illusion we're living in is the Maya of the Vedic mythology. They talk about how all physicality is just Maya, illusion, and the real thing, what really exists, is your consciousness, is your feeling of being I am, of being separate from everything else, of having desires, of wanting to know. That subjective center point that we all feel, that's more fundamental than this physical body that's around us. We're a spiritual being having a physical experience, as they say, not a physical being having spiritual experiences. You are a soul who has a body. You're not a body who has a soul. That kind of thing. Mystics and whatever throughout the ages have said that, and I think science is finally catching up and finding that this is true. We come from consciousness. Consciousness is the apex of the pyramid, if you will. That's the eye in the pyramid. The eye, the letter I, as well as the eye, your third eye, which allows you to see this physical world. that's on the apex of the Masonic symbol for a reason, because that's the I am in the Bible that is God is the same I am that you feel in you. Only the one in the Bible is the objective, omnipresent, omniscient deity, and you are a subjective, not omniscient, not omnipresent, not omnipotent creation within the mind of that one ultimate entity. So I think the way I view what's going on here is it's like a dream where we're all in the mind of God or the mind of Brahma, and the physicality that we think exists is really just an illusion, as is the separateness and the duality that we live in this world of good and evil, up and down, man and woman, inhale, exhale, night, day, sun, moon. But in reality, we come from a singularity, the one objective being, consciousness, God, and this subjective, dualistic, physical world that we're all in here is just a playground. It's just a dream. And at the end of it, you'll die, and a piece of God will wake up to realize he was only dreaming.
You have answered one of my questions, which was why would a creator or creators allow the Earth to decline into the mess it is today that we're living through? Are you saying that we actually created this reality?
Well, not we in the sense of us in this devolved state of subjective consciousness inside physical human bodies that we find ourselves in now. Obviously not. But as I said, the I am, which is inside us, which in Buddhist and Vedic text is called the Atman, is one with and comes from Brahman, which is the I am of God. Mm-hmm. So they're saying that the I am that we all experience subjectively actually is the same thing that the original intelligent consciousness that created us and everything experiences. It also experiences itself as I am. Could you imagine just being a consciousness, but there's no reality outside you? You're just conscious that you exist. But now what? What do?
Right.
The only thing you can do is like play make-believe or hide and seek, where you pretend you're not yourself and create something other than yourself. And so this creates a dualism, and that's exactly what we see in the world here. Everything is dualistic. The yin-yang is everywhere, the up and down, good, evil, male, female. It's in everything. And so we're given free will in a dualistic world. So why is there evil? Why is bad things happening? Well, it's our fault. You can't blame God for that. God created this, or in the Vedic text, they say it's an inevitability that God would separate himself into subjective packets of consciousness. It's what's necessary to happen. What else would you do? You're just God. You're just, okay, what do you do? The only thing you can possibly do is this kind of make-believe, this maya, create some sort of a dream or an ultimately illusory universe, and then put little packets of yourself in there and play a game. And that's what I think we're doing here. It's like a place where we can learn and experience. I think reincarnation is obvious, actually, that we come here over and over again, and it's part of the deal that we can't remember it. That's why you don't know that you had previous lives. But even if you want to believe in some sort of nihilistic view that we come from nothing, and when you die, there's nothing after that, well, isn't that kind of like reincarnation too? Because you're saying that you came from some of this nothing, became everything you are, and then when you die, you'll return to that nothing. Yeah. That same nothing that gave rise to you in the first place. So how is that nothing? It's certainly something. And so this is actually how I came out of my atheistic belief, is with this one thought where I realized there is no nothing. How could all that is me come from nothing, be all that it is, and then one day disappear into nothing, if that really is nothing? That's not a nothing. Whatever that is, it's some sort of generator of consciousnness. Like I said, a subjective packet of the one consciousness seems to be able to shoot into any baby that's born, and it's go time. So that's my view.
Excellent, Eric. I'd love to have you to come back on the show to talk more about this type of stuff, because I do have a lot of shows and get into these types of discussions also. This is very, very fascinating, and you're quite a deep thinker, my friend.
Well, thanks, man.
It's good. It's really good. It's good to run across people, who are actually thinking through this and, have the convictions that you have. Now, I mentioned earlier in the show that I did buy your book. the Flat Earth Conspiracy. And I'm going to recommend to everybody that you go to Eric's site, buy the book, you download it as a PDF. What I do is I send it off to Staples so they can print it and I can read it. And I haven't read the whole thing yet. I'm about 40 to 50 pages in, but an excellent, excellent read. It keeps your interest. It's well written. It's articulate. So I highly recommend folks take a look and go to your site. Now, Eric, with that, I have taken up a lot of your time and you have been very, very kind. Could you tell us more where we can learn about you, your websites, your books, YouTube?
Yeah. I'm Eric Dubay, EricDubay, and you can find me on YouTube. Atlanteanconspiracy.com is my website. You can find a lot of flat earth and other conspiracy stuff on there. I'm the president of the International Flat Earth Research Society, IFERS. You can find that at ifers.boards.net. And yeah, those would be good places to start. I'm on Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter and all that as well, just trying to spread the word through social media in any way I can. And I appreciate anyone else out there who's listening who has figured it out or is at least questioning the flat earth. I encourage you to continue, and once you have figured it out, please help spread the word, because this is definitely, it's like a linchpin. I really think that once people wake up to this, the whole house of cards is going to fall down with it.
Yeah, I agree.
Academia, politics, NASA, I mean, you name it, everyone's lying to you. The scientists, or at least they're duped. You know, so all these institutions that are teaching us these things are going to have to be completely revamped and rethought once you realize this.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, actually, when you think about it. But we have to think about it. So, Eric, I do want to say, again, thank you so much. And you have an open invitation to come back anytime. If you want to talk about flat earth, you want to talk about any other topic, you want to talk about spirituality, metaphysics, we can have that discussion. I'd love to have you come back.
Cool. Great chat. Nice talking to you, Mike.
Yeah. All right. So I know it's getting late there for you, Eric, and I'll have the show out probably in about a week or so. I have a lot of friends who are asking, because I had mentioned to them, I actually put on Facebook that you were going to come on the show, and they were very excited. So I'll have the show out in about a week, and I'll shoot a copy off to you. I'll send you the link to the YouTube channel and such, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Sounds good, man.
All right, Eric. Take care of yourself.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye now. And that concludes my interview with Eric Dubay, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Eric's website is www.atlanteanconspiracy.com, where you'll find a plethora of content on the flat earth theory, along with other areas of alternative research. He also runs the International Flat Earth Research Society, which can be found by heading over to ifers.boards.net. Eric also has a popular YouTube channel. All of the sites I just mentioned are in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. And you can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.